So hi, my name is Gerardo, and welcome to the session on building Drupal sites with attribute-driven design. It's an architectural framework in the sense that it allows you to go through a process in which you really pretty much architect your system, whether it's Drupal by itself as an application or you have a system of systems, meaning Drupal provides other services for your overall product. And so, I'm trying to do that again. I've been doing working with Drupal for about 8 years now. I work at Rico USA, where we do a lot of Drupal websites for our developer community, and we have a lot of Drupal websites that are internal. And a lot of my experience here is working with the architects. So I'm not officially an architect yet at Rico, but that's the path that I'm heading. And this is part of my development growth, is I have to present what I'm learning, and so I'm here to share that with you guys today. And what we've architected at Rico is basically a support system for our developers that come in and develop on our off-the-shelf platform. So we have Android-based hardware that developers will build applications, and so we use this Drupal site as a support system. The only problem is when I first created that site, it was about 8 years ago, we created all of our modules, and they were all they have to stay proprietary. So our roadmap for 2020 is to push everything to Drupal 9 and try to make everything as open source. So try to give back to the community. And so we started with that whole project without understanding the scope of the community, the Drupal community. We just knew that it was a framework that someone introduced into our kind of meetings, but yeah, it was unfortunate that we can't just share that code, but because it has a lot of interfaces that are proprietary to Rico, we just can't do it. Anyways, so today's agenda, I know one of you asked if there was going to be any coding involved. Well, the ADD is, as I mentioned, is more of a process similar to some of your agile processes that you have maybe within your development teams. And in this case, it's just doing this process to define the system that you guys are developing. So I'll give a little bit scope and expectations, go into attribute-driven design, share the workshops that we do at Rico in order to engage the architects, the engineers, the various stakeholders that basically come in and help us define the sites or the web applications or the services. And then I'll just, give some closing statements and open it up for talk, for I guess Q&A and things like that.
Can you close the door?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'm kind of happy it's a little more closed. I was imagining a big stage or something like that. Not a big stage, but when we were doing it in San Francisco, it was a little bit different the last time. But anyways, this is so feel free to stop me and ask questions, basically. So there's software architecture. Obviously, if you just do Google search, you'll get a lot of information. You'll get a lot of whether it's what people are doing. Right now the big buzzwords within Drupal is decoupled and headless and things like that. But there are some of the basics that get overlooked, and so that's kind of my goal here, is to kind of bring back some of the traditional approach. Obviously, if you have time constraints, then some of this you might think, oh, it's just too long. We can't inject that into our process. But if you understand ADD, there might be elements that you can take out, and it's just because it does go through an iteration. So anytime you go through your own iterations of design or engineering, you might be able to use some of these elements and maybe inject them into characteristics of how you guys engineer these applications. So So software architecture, the main idea is, we construct software architecture to satisfy some business goal. So, the idea is, whether it's your client saying, hey, I just need a website to allow people to come in, register, and we provide them information, or it's what we had an internal support system that we needed. We were paying a lot of money to Oracle for Right Now Web, and we decided, because Ricoh has a lot of field technicians, so each field technician needed a $3,000 license, and when you have over 2,000 field technicians, that cost is pretty high for Ricoh. So we decided to move it to Drupal, and we reduced it by a lot. And so now we just use Drupal as our support mechanism for the field. But in any case, you have to define those business goals. And ADD is all about merging the business goals with the architecture, because you have these various meetings, and I'll go through each step where you get information back from the customer. So a lot of people, many architectural decisions are made early, but not all of them are. So if you're doing agile or sprint-based development, you might be making them as you learn and move on. But with ADD, it's actually, that's baked into its core. It's the idea is you're gonna have feedback from the customer, and then you're gonna define that early on, work on the hardest parts first, and then iterate through, and then evolve your software elements. So, two examples that I'm going to be just kind of talking about, I'll flip, is, within Ricoh, my experience is I developed a simple website too for Ricoh, which is just, we have an alliance website that basically, if someone wants to partner up with Ricoh, we dump them a lot of information. They can sign up for notifications. So you can actually develop Drupal just and architect it as a plain old website, right? And you can use ADD for this, because Drupal out of the box already has a lot of elements to where you just take it on, or you just decide not to use, and then you can bring in whatever else you need through the modules or through custom development. So when I talk about ADD, it covers both Drupal as just a main site, or with the support system that we created, it can be also as a cloud service, and it's just an element of the system. So it's a system of systems, basically. So when you do ADD, you can use it as a plain approach to developing just a single site, or you can use it as your full cloud service that you're gonna create. And so the idea, the expectations of today is just giving you guys the knowledge to understand that ADD is a nice tool set to have, and it could be something that, once again, you either just read upon, maybe practice within your teams, and maybe adopt one or two elements of it, or full, the full framework. So what is attribute-driven design? So again, it's a framework of defining software architecture based on software quality attributes. So you basically define what you want it what you want the character of the system that you're creating, or I guess you inject certain elements into the DNA of that system. And here are some examples of attributes. So we're all kind of familiar with this, availability, interoperability, modifiability, performance, security, testability, usability. So all of these are the attributes that kind of, and you can have many other ones, but these are the attributes that you want to set at the beginning. So you don't want to wait until you're done with the project, you deliver it, and then they're like, hey, but wait a minute. We want now these engineers to inject test cases, but and then the code base is all over the place, and you don't have the ability to do that easily. So the idea here is, you define this up front. Whether whoever the key customer is, whether it's internal or external, you want to define this up front. And so the life cycle behind ADD is basically you do quality attributes and design constraints, which are considered as you're defining the architecture. So, and we'll go over some examples of each of quality attributes and design constraints. And we do this through a plan, do, and check. So in ADD, they give you this graph, so I just use that because I didn't really have time to recreate it. But anyway, so you have your system that you're kind of thinking at a high level at the very top. And then, so you get your quality attributes requirements, so maybe you want testability, performance, and security. You find out what your design constraints are, your functional requirements, and then you just start designing elements of it. And then at the end, what you're left with is a system, and you can actually see all the elements, how they're connected, and through which interfaces they're connected, and then you have this document now that evolves with your cloud service. So we're going to walk through the 8 steps, but this is kind of like the flow here. You get again your inputs, which are your functional requirements, design constraints, quality attributes. They come in, and then you toggle through all of them through each step, and I'll kind of briefly talk about all of those core 8 steps. But let's go into, I think we already all have a good understanding of functional requirements, but I'll cover that, and as well as design constraints and quality attribute requirements. But I'll kind of go over some of them that we have and we use. And the good thing about this is, anytime you guys are developing these and creating these functional requirements, you guys should try to have a way to store them so you can reuse them, because it's important to not do the work twice always for every customer that you get or every project that you do. So we have a big database where, when we're dealing with certain functional requirements, we can go and grab it and just massage it to fit the new project. In any case, so some functional requirements that I've used is the system shall be interoperable among various systems and be allowed to collect various information related to specialized data. So it's very high level, it can be used anywhere, but this makes sense to the architects. When you give it to the architects, they understand, okay, now we have to worry about interoperability. How are we going to get data from one, whether it's a legacy system or a Drupal system, and what are we going to do with it, and how we're going to send it back and forth. Something like the bottom one is the system shall integrate with Azure Active Directory. Rico has recently moved to Office 365, so our single sign-on now is using basically Azure Active Directory. So we have to now modify it to fit this. But this is now one functional requirement that we get. And so you have all these functional requirements and that come in as an input for the process. And then design constraints. This is something, again, if you guys are dealing with multiple customers all the time, or if it's just one internal project, again, I like to store this in some area where other engineers can always grab it, and that's what I've known. I've seen at Rico is that they have a good repository with all of this data. So we as engineers, we can go in there and kind of see what fits, and again massage it. So design constraints as inputs are basically decisions about the system design that must be incorporated into any final design of the system. So it can be as simple as the system shall integrate with legacy applications. If you guys have legacy applications or your customer does, that's a design constraint, meaning there's no way around it. You have to meet that requirement. And then we even have this one now because the second one, which is the system shall be implemented using PHP IDE, because our organization, they bought all these licenses, so they want you to use it, and it's part of the build process. So some of the new engineers that come into the projects, they kind of complain because they have their own preference, but it's just a design constraint. We push that because we want everyone to be at a baseline. And then, so another example, this one we also use. The system shall only interact with other systems via publish and subscribe. So internally, the technicians have their mobile app that they, send a text message to a service that we pay for documentation or to reschedule an appointment, and that then comes back to our support system to create a ticket. So unfortunately, the services that we provide for that SMS uses publish subscribe, so we have to now use that as well, and ensure that we satisfy that. So again, design constraints are those conversations that you have at the beginning, because you don't want those to be the surprises that forces a long delay. So and then from there, after you have your requirements, your design constraints, you also have to provide the quality attribute requirements. And this is where you get this information from, obviously, who's ever paying the money for the project or executive management. And then you also kind of, because they might say, hey, I want it just to be secure, but they haven't really give you information of what that means. So then, then you can start creating these quality attribute requirements, like for example, security. The system shall deny access to unauthorized users 100% of the time. So, and then so as an architect, you're gonna decide whether, hey, does Drupal have to do this? Is this all Drupal's role and responsibility, or can we inject some other services within the server that can help in this process, so we have 100% that no one can come in and view content or information. And so for us, this was a big one, because we had in our support system, we also use it for our developer community, and these developers are we call them vendors, and they develop applications that compete with each other. So in no way do they want vendor A looking at vendor B's information, or sometimes they upload source code so we can analyze it and tell them where the problem is. And so in this case, we definitely need almost 100% that no content can ever be seen by anyone other than that developer. Testability, that's something that we didn't start off with, but now with our Drupal 8, we want 80% coverage, so we're injecting that as part of our quality attribute. I think we developed everything in Drupal 7, and our test coverage, if at best, is 25-30% right now. So buildability. So this is the one that came from it was the executive manager that when we told him how much the cost savings was going to be if we went to Drupal, he said, okay, I want it in 6 months, and that was because the fiscal year was going to end. And he said, and so we had tried to get it, but we didn't make it 6 months. We told him up front that we can't do that because you'll lose testability or usability. So, and I'll go through the steps where, if a stakeholder demands a certain attribute, then that means other attributes do get hit with not meeting the requirements, or not meeting the attributes in the first phase or the second phase. In any case. Let's go. So step 0, So before you give everything to the architects, you definitely want the business side to prioritize the requirements according to the business and mission goals. So if you guys are architects, then you want this to already be prioritized by the business group, or those that are paying the money, or those that are responsible for deciding on what the system's going to look like. And then once that's done, then the information goes into the group of architects, engineers, and probably product managers, and then they start the first step, which is basically confirm that there is sufficient requirements information. So a lot of times, I remember because everyone was new to Drupal when we were doing this. We didn't really understand what Drupal was. Only one engineer really knew, and we kind of just relied on him. Actually two. It was, I don't know if you guys know Greg Anderson, the Drush guy. So he was my manager at that time. So he was the guy that championed with one other engineer, and so we were we were relying on their knowledge in Drupal for most of this. But in any case, you want to prioritize the requirements, and at that point, you'll start kind of understanding which elements of the system you're going to focus on during the design. Because as you can see, if it's a Drupal site, then maybe you break up it as elements within functionality in Drupal. You know, maybe content management, roles, or user management, notifications if you have that. So you know, you can break up one site into various elements. But when you're dealing with a system of a system, then you have so many areas that you have to touch. Within Rico, we also have to touch the server aspect of everything. So you know, we have to manage the database and the deployment process and all of that. But the good thing is we have DevOps that do a lot of that stuff. But so you know, in this kind of first step, we're meeting with all those stakeholders to just really define the entire process so everyone has an understanding. And then in this case, you know, with the requirements, you're going to consider what's the impact on the architecture structure. You know, at this point, you'll understand if there's anything that already gives you a red flag, like, oh, okay, this might be an issue right here, especially when you're dealing with legacy data. I mean, there's so many times that we've had to create a lot of middleware just because that legacy data is very hard to get to, and so this is, you know, in this step one, you kind of start getting a picture of how everything is at a very high level, and then as you go through all the additional steps, then you start hitting it one at a time. So and as you can see, this it can go into agile. So it's not really a long process that you think that's going to take a month just to do this. No, you can break it up. So so in confirming, you know, as I said, step one, we want to basically rank all of the requirements. So as members of the committee doing ADD, you want to rank them. You know, like, okay, this is probably most important, and I'll show you how you rank them in a step that comes pretty soon. But in this case, you just do a typical just 1 through 10 ranking system, or 1 through n, and then so you have an idea, and then you want to get the top 10, and then you want to create these what they're called stimulus response examples. Basically, you define kind of that requirement and you try to elaborate a little bit more on it. So in the case of security, an attempt of a Drupal system hack will be identified by the system. The hack activity will detect unauthorized intrusions, track, and prevent. So and then you start defining, okay, the stimulus source, attempt is basically an attempt of someone hacking the Drupal system. The stimulus is a hack activity. And then, the artifact is basically the Drupal system, and then you want to define what the response is going to be and what the response measures. So you'll do this for all of the key requirements. So then you have an idea of what the expectations are. Whether it's a process or whether it's, hey, this is what we need the system to react in this way. So. And again, if you start this early on, you create a database so you have a lot of these ready to go, because once you do it once, you'll see that they fit a lot of your future Drupal projects. And then in step two, if it's the first time, then you're decomposing the entire system. But once you go into like iteration 2 or 3 or then what you're doing is you're going to start seeing basically each of the elements, and you're going to start really looking at the main element and what interfaces are going to you're going to need to create that need to communicate with the the other elements or within the system itself. So this is where you make sure that you're decomposing each of those elements with the business criteria in mind, and as well as the organizational criteria. What that means is you don't want to start creating something unless you understand what is available for you. Because one example is we use some open source forget what it was, some PDF library, right? So as we're decomposing the web form, we understand that this open source PDF library is going to be a design constraint to that element. So that's what you're doing in this step. You're always going back to each element and making sure that your business criteria is being met, and so you never diverge from the business criteria or the organizational criteria. And so this is it's you know, it was really hard for me to try to picture this or create an image, but what I can do is I do have an example, kind of, what is it called, ADD example of just a server, how we did a server. So I'll put that in the document package that I shared, because then you can see how we did it to make servers fault tolerant. So in this area, you basically start getting information that you tie to each of the elements. But so moving on, yeah, here this is probably a little better. So after that, so you have the element, you kind of decomposed it, and now you have these requirements that are attached to that element. And so what you want to do is you want to prioritize all of the requirements that are attached to that element with this type of ranking where you put high, medium, low, and you group them in this ranking where the first letter represents that this is important to the stakeholders. Okay, so you have a requirement, and if you say something is high, it's because the stakeholder has demanded it. Like maybe the customer or again, executive management. And then the second character represents how much is it of an impact it's going to have on the overall architecture. So for example, if we have these architecture drivers, web application availability, communication mechanism, and you can have, you'll have tons of these for any system that you create, then these are two very high, because the importance to the stakeholders is high, and the difficulty is high as well for the engineers to ensure that Drupal is always up and running and can communicate with one-to-many clients. So we tell this to whatever business stakeholder is kind of demanding some other types of requirements. Like, hey, the thing is it fails all the time. Well, that wasn't part of the requirements early on. We told you, we showed you this, and you probably chose communication or something. So this table right here is used to kind of as kind of what was I going to say? I lost the word. Well, okay, let me just give you a story of how this works for us. So after we deployed the website, Greg Anderson left, so we lost super engineer. And then so we got new engineer, and then very critical of the whole process, like, oh, why did you guys decide this? Why did you guys say that? Well, check this out. This is what we had, and so luckily we had this as proof that, hey, at that point the people in charge who demand certain requirements, this is what they wanted. And so this document really helped us kind of, like show proof that we didn't just do it because we thought that was the best thing, or we just weren't aware of whatever we broke. So we use this document a lot when we have to explain to new management of why we made certain decisions, and then so in any case, this is for us has been one of the most important steps, and we use it in most of our development, whether it's application like Android based or Drupal based, because it just really allows you to define what the key business stakeholders want.
Do you have a quick example of the decomposition step? This goes seems fuzzy.
Yeah. Right after, let me just go through the steps, and I'll show you. Yeah, I'll show you. Yeah, definitely. And so at step 4, you choose a design concept that satisfies the architecture drivers, and then here is where we're starting to get into the patterns that you're going to choose. So I'll go to the next slide. So you'll create this matrix, where you have your architecture drivers, where whatever you set for your system, and then you start thinking about the architecture patterns that you want to develop. And so one example, and I'll toggle between these two, is this is a good example of 3 different patterns that you can bring into your development. And the traditional CMS, where you have just Drupal fully coupled, you have headless or progressively decoupled. So that can be one pattern that you guys decide anytime you build a Drupal site. And then what you do is you list the pros and cons of each. And there's information on the web for everything, but this allows you to have this table and really define, are we going to head down, a headless approach or decoupled CMS approach, or are we going to go and just use Drupal out of the box? And so in this step, or actually when you're building this table, this is where the architects are really they'll throw some of the latest and greatest patterns like microservices, things like that, or you'll see kind of the most common MVC, layered. So this is where the architects really start thinking of okay, we had all these elements, and we're focusing on this element right now, and so what should be basically the pattern that we use to meet that requirement. And so in the case of Drupal, again, these are 3 patterns, but you have so many patterns that you can use for all of the other functionality that you have, whether again is accessing legacy systems or showing the front end to the user. So you have so many patterns at your disposal, but you want to put those up front so anyone in the future can understand what that system, how it works underneath the covers, because that's another issue that we have a lot. Anytime we get new engineers, we have to train them for a very long time until they start understanding what it is. These documents that we have help, but it looks, and I think reduces some of that training. But if you guys can inject that aspect of it, you guys will have documentation that you can refer to at any point in the future. Step 4, so the design decisions at that point is, you want to build the functionality associated with different types of elements. So, sometimes, again, elements, and when we talk about elements, it can be something very simple. It can be a custom module that you're downloading from the open source community. It can be anything, or some, extra process that you have on your server to do something. So in our example, we have our support system, and we have a Node.js application that runs. We have even Java servlets that interact with the Drupal system to do certain operations. And so, as you can see, all those elements are separate, but we do have diagrams that show us, okay, this is how this tool works on our website. So, and this is how and actually, let me just give you a quick example of the website. Okay. I don't know. I can't. So this is one of the websites that we do. This is not the escalation. The escalation database is or support system is internal, but this is a Drupal 7 site that we have. And so one example is this logcat tool. So out in the field, we have developers that have to go out and pull these debug logs from hardware, and it's basically a tar file, and they're all encrypted. So all these technicians would have to take that tar file back to their computers elsewhere and then decrypt them. So we created this online tool that basically when the user comes here, this is a Node.js application now, and we created a proxy-based module that sends single sign-on and everything over to here. And they put this cat because it's actually a tool that was created in Japan. And so as you can see, is we have 2 elements here. We have the element of of the module that we had to create. So when they click this, it goes to our other server that accesses what we call the logcat tool. And then here's another example is we have these, because again, we created this site back in 2008, I think, and it's still running. And this is the site that I have to port in by 2020. So here's another example of, okay, we still have Drupal running, and we created this custom module that now we can upload application zip files. It's basically an APK file. And then so I grab that file, send it to a Java servlet. I know we're pretty old school. And then so what we do is we grab the APK file and sign it with a signature that will run on our hardware, because our hardware is closed. It's not like the Android system from your phones. It requires a certain key. So here we have, again, just a simple custom module that we created. And, again, we have two elements here. We have the module, and then we have how that module connects to the servlet. And then then we have all of these functionality in the back end that moves the file over to a secure area before it moves it into the tool to do all of the business logic to sign it, and then bring it back so the user can download it. And that's why I had to create this checkbox, because I couldn't put a direct link there, because I wasn't able to serve the download directly through Drupal. I had to do, this one also serves it through Java servlet, so we check security, because we never want another customer to get this link and download the file, and then they have access, they can decompile the APK file and have access to someone else's source. So as you can see, those are kind of design constraints and elements of how we had to construct it so it was highly secure. Let me go back here. And I wish, and so I know now in the future we are gonna, again, we have a mandate to make things more open and to share. So we will have the ability to share our processes and whatever we create. So I'll definitely probably create a project page in Drupal and things like that. And any modules that we share, we'll upload. But if anyone ever needs to hook into Java servlets, let me know. I can send you sample code, no problem. It's kind of old school, but it still works. Okay, so step 5. This is where your design decisions will now be used to say, hey, am I going to use architectural views that are module-based, component and connector-based, allocation-based, and so just a quick overview of what module-based means is the most famous pattern is the layered pattern. So if you wanted to make it modular, then that's how you would structure your system architecture. And so we use so many different patterns. So don't think one pattern is what's going to fit your website. It's never like that. So we have layered for certain things. We have MVC for other things. We have peer-to-peer and publish, subscribe. So it all depends on your element. So that's the key there is, like, when you're decomposing your element, you define what patterns are going to be used, and then from there you'll be able to get feedback back on, okay, we're going to use this, and this is going to cause a little bit of an issue with testability or with usability or with performance. And if all of that is up front, then you have reasons of why certain things are the way they are. So which is why I like the way that we do this, because I think now it's so easy for us to just again have proof that we made decisions for a certain reason, and I don't have to try to remember way back when we had a water cooler meeting or the meeting in the kitchen or in front of my cube. All of that is documented, and it's not buried in some email or some Slack channel. It's all, here it is. This is why we did it. And again, a lot of the youngsters think it's just too much. They just want to get there and code, but a lot of times you have to kind of push, scale them back a little bit, because the idea is you want to make good decisions. Okay, so yeah, I think I already touched a little bit on this. Just communication between the elements, whether it's internal or external, is all part of step 5. And then we go into step 6. You start observing any information produced by one element and consumed by another. So you want to make sure that communication pipeline is correct, and whether it's a binding that you have to make sure, or it's a port that you open up, and those are certain things that you have to kind of understand as you decompose your elements. So you start understanding, okay, we're doing this, hey, but is it going to have any effect with any other element, when it has to communicate? And then this is where you can record any findings of interface documentation. So again, like when we figured out we weren't able to give a link that someone can directly download that application, we had to decide, okay, what are our options? And we found that when you create certain forms, you can use a checkbox, and that's why we use the checkbox. So those are the things that you start documenting now. So then when you give that piece to whichever team is going to be responsible for it, they'll know how to engineer it correctly. So the design decisions that happen here is this. You just start looking at what interfaces between applications will communicate, whether it's high level or you're at the point where you can now define those interfaces. Luckily, everyone's moving into APIs, so I think it's a lot easier now. It's not like before, where you had to sometimes open up a web socket or an internal socket. Everyone's kind of going HTTP, web API. So it's a lot easier to kind of integrate with other systems. But you might one day be approached to, hey, this is how we do it. Here's a SOAP API that you have to call, and then you have to get all this XML junk and then try to figure out which little element that you need. And we had to do that too when we were doing single sign-on. So these are the type of things that you'll kind of define and design. So you can quickly start analyzing what's going to be needed. And then so I found this example, which which is really, really cool. After the first 2 iterations, you start to get pictures like this, and this is kind of what I want to achieve. Not with Acquia, but because we have to do it ourselves. But not that I have anything against Acquia. I actually use their tool. But we want to do something like this with Drupal 8/9, depending on where we're at when we release our next version in 2021. So and these are the type of conversations we're having right now. We're like in iteration, I think maybe 3 or 4. And we hope to end that by end fiscal year this year, and just really now start to get to work. And that's why I'm here as well, is because I want to learn more ways to get local to production and have a CI/CD process. Drush made it really good, but with everything in Drupal 8 and 9. And there's so many options, you have to kind of figure out and commit to one. So luckily we don't have to do that yet, and there's a lot of new things coming out, or just becoming more mature. So step 7 and 8, you just verify the functional requirements. It's just a verification process, and then after that, step 8, obviously you just repeat. So after you verify, you get to the point where you're starting to see how everything looks. Then you go back and you decompose the next element or the next set of elements. So it's all about you get 4 to 6 is kind of core, and it gets kind of messy, and that's where it's a little confusing to understand. But if you're just thinking about it like it's one element at a time, if you have that luxury, then you'll start seeing everything form, and you definitely want to try to hit the parent elements. And then make that as solid as possible, because any child elements that you create will adopt and inherit all of the good characteristics that you created. And then so to recap, this ADD process, again, it can go into your waterfall, spiral, RUP, or agile development process. And so I'll walk through just how we do it. So we do kick it off with what is called a quality attribute workshop. And then so we're doing basically the first, we don't go further than the first step. And then, we all meet, we get key stakeholders, we obviously want the architects there, at least 2 or 3. We also invite the one business side, and then the engineers, the QA for sure. And then we all meet and we huddle, and then basically we try to avoid this, right? Where a traditional system is developed where you have these high-level requirements, whether it's and then these legacy systems that you're either trying to recreate or hook into, and then and you do have we obviously quality attributes is not something new, so you kind of already have that in your mind when a customer tells you what they expect, and traditionally for even me when I first started, a miracle occurs and you just end up with, hey, here's the site, it works, take it, and everything's good. However, with ADD, it gets a lot better, and then you actually, I develop sites on the side, and I've had now like templates that I can just spin up, and I can really just launch and just deliver, as websites, and it's all because, I've now like understood kind of what people really need and how to do it correctly. And also having Greg Anderson as a mentor, he told me all about the deployment process. So, I could essentially go to a site and just, almost create the site, the development, staging, production, all within, a couple hours, and it's done. But with, Drupal 7, that's something that I need to learn. But in any case, you don't. I mean, a lot of you are, do this and it works. Then that's fine. I'm not trying to change that, but just see if there's maybe elements of ADD that you can bring that will help you with really architecting. And what I envision is if we can somehow, when we create these, architectures, share them back to the community, because I feel that that's one thing that I'm seeing Acquia do a lot with the decoupled. They're actually providing information that really helps you understand how you should build your system. But there, in the past there was not that. I remember when I was doing Drupal 7, you kind of knew, okay, I need Apache, I need MySQL, PHP, and if I need to have email sent, I need to get SMTP server, all of that. So I think if we can give back to the community kind of architectures that work for certain instances, I think that would really help. I mean, I'm sure the Pantheons and Acquia, they're not going to like it, but I think it's important. It really is, because when you have a good understanding of how the web application or the website should be built, then you're more comfortable releasing it, and you're more comfortable maybe getting a client that's in the government or in education, where you're not like that, oh man, this is too big for me, or I don't even want to touch that because they're going to come after me and take all my money if I break something. So things like that. That's why I don't know what the best way is, because maybe get sharing documents on GitHub or something like that. But I'm definitely open to anything here for that. For sure, in Drupal, the website where you create your profile of a project, that's a good start. But in any case, when you do the workshop, there's scenario brainstorming that really helps as well. So I'll just quickly go through that. Basically, you create scenarios, and again, based on the requirements. So earlier I showed you the stimulus source, but this is where you kind of inject. That's why you invite the business guy there, so you understand, okay, they want usability, or they want to support various form factors, and so you have elements of the business side, and then you start understanding what how it's going to look at the architecture level as well. And then, so I think, yeah. So and then the results of this workshop, basically you get your architecture drivers, you get a really good understanding of everything, you get the raw scenarios, And then you can prioritize the raw scenarios as well while you're there. So you can do all of that upfront work, and then after that you'll be able to start the step 1, step 2 with our architects in the room and the various solution engineers. I think okay, I got 20 minutes, so or 10 minutes. So I think I'll end it there because the rest is just information. But let me. I think I have. I know there's. We're actually, if anyone really wants to see the example, I'll be available for that. But any questions so far? Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah.